Well, hey there. Welcome to In the Growth Space. My name is David McGlennon, and I am your host. I am really excited about today's conversation with an author that really appealed to me when I saw his book. And I'll tell you why here in just a moment. One of the things I'd like to ask you, though, before we get into that, is if you would just go out to your podcast app and give us a 5-star rating, that would be really awesome. We would appreciate it so much. And if you're really up for it, would you also leave a review? One of the things that we are really trying to do is spread the word on how to grow your leadership team, how to grow your company, how to grow yourself personally. And that's really what this podcast is all about. And so if you could do those two things for us, man, that would help us out greatly, and we'd really appreciate it. So in this episode today, I have a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Christian Muntean. And Christian wrote a book called Train to Lead. And one of the things that I really liked about his book is that he took training principles, athletic training principles, and put them into a format in this book and applied training principles to leadership. And I thought that was brilliant. So many of you know I've been into triathlon and I've done a lot of athletic different endeavors. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily a thorough through and through athlete, but I do love exercising and I love working out and I love training. And the sport of triathlon for a long period of time gave me a real incentive to really apply endurance and training principles. And what he talks about in this book is a principle called periodization. So it's taking different segments of training and applying them for short periods of time. And then at the end, there's a rest period and then doing it over again. So it's really all about growth and growth in a different way. In athletics, you would try to focus on a certain component, like, for example, endurance or a base building, aerobic base building, and then strength, and then power, and so forth, and then rest and recovery. And so he takes these same principles and applies them to leadership. And really, that's what our conversation is about today. The book is called Train to Lead, and it's really good. It's very practical. And let me tell you a little bit about Christian right now before I get into this conversation. So Christian is a strategic consultant, and he does a lot of consulting through his company called Vantage Consulting. And he has a ton of global experience from over 40 countries and enhances business and leadership practices in his consulting practice. His approach is informed by a comprehensive background in organizational growth and efficiency, and he lives in Anchorage, Alaska, where he balances his professional insights with a personal passion for woodworking and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You can discover a lot more about his approach to leadership growth, and organizational development at his website, christianmuntean.com, ChristianMuntean.com. And you can also pick up his book there. And let's get into that conversation with Christian Muntean right now. Well, hey, Christian, I am really glad to have you here on the podcast today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have this conversation. You know, one of the things that always interests me is authors who write books, and I've never written a full book. I've written a little ebook, and I know what it took to write that, so I can't even imagine writing a regular book. What led you to do that? What led you to write the book?
Well, this book, I mean, the short answer is I was a strength and conditioning instructor for about 12 years, and in the middle, as a hobby on the side. And in the middle of that, I was driving away from the gym thinking, why is it that we as instructors, you can take an athlete and create a training regimen for them so that they'll peak out right before their event. Mm-hmm. And any knowledgeable instructor knows how to do that. It's a very standard approach, and it works, and it's consistent. It's what all of the Olympic athletes use. It's what any high performer uses. And I thought, why is it with leadership? It's mostly, okay, the promotion's coming. Maybe you get a book to read. Maybe you get sent to a workshop, and it's mostly just don't screw up. And there isn't really any kind of real clear training program. And the training programs that exist, and I've been through many of them. I mean, I have done, this is what I did my graduate work in. It's mostly, even the graduate work I did, is mostly, here's a bunch of really great ideas. It's up to you to figure out which ones that apply.
Yeah.
It's up to you to try to remember them all. And it's up to you to decide what order do these really fit in. Because there is an order. You can't, for example, as a leader, you're going to deal with conflict, but you're always going to struggle in your ability to manage conflict in the workplace if you personally haven't worked on some basic self-management practices, and or credibility issues. And so there's an order to leadership topics that make them more easy to access. So I became really interested in that topic, and that's, I guess, the shorter version of why I wrote the book. Because I wanted to make something that somebody who really cared about leading, took it seriously, could follow a process that wasn't just good ideas that left them confused, but would actually walk them through, okay, I'm, maybe not as good as I could ever become as a leader, but I'm as good as I can become right now.
So, taking this approach to, kind of mirroring what we do in athletics and this periodization, talk a little bit about how you then, took the ideas of strength and power and endurance and even recovery into leadership, because I found that really fascinating as I was reading through the book. Especially the recovery, because as you and I were talking before we got recording, I think for a leader as well as an athlete, that's the hardest part. The recovery part is, and I think it was in the book that you said too. One of the hardest things to do is to know that that's when the actual growth happens, is in the recovery.
Right. Yeah. So to answer the first part of that, the reason I wrote it the way I did is because, what I'm following in the book follows in athletics what's called a periodization training cycle. Yeah. And for people who are unfamiliar with that, the idea is that your training programs shouldn't just do one thing, and it also shouldn't just be a confusion of a lot of different movements. That's good if you're trying to do calorie burn. It's not good if you're trying to build skills or athletic performance. And so the typical structure of a training, kind of briefly, is you focus on basic conditioning, basic foundational components for just a period of weeks. And then you switch to strength training, which is the basis of really all of your capacity. And that's your ability to make something happen, really. Yeah. And then again, you only focus on that for a few weeks. And then you move to power, the ability to use your strength in athletics. It's to be able to use it explosively or to force movement. In leadership, it's to be able to change the trajectory of events or to be able to stop or start something. And then you move on to endurance. How do you maintain something over a longer haul, whatever that is? It's a sprint, it's a long run, whatever it is. And then you move into recovery modes, and then you cycle through that. And so athletic trainers will design a program where you only have somebody focus in each area for a period of time and then move on. And I just wondered, would this apply to leadership? And as I thought more about, okay, what would be leadership corollaries to conditioning or preparing your body or your mind for stress? What would be corollaries to being able to make things move? What does the research show are the primary traits that you need to have to be able to make things happen, and so on. And I found that there was enormous connection between those concepts. And I liked applying the periodization approach because many leaders will pick up on an idea that they find compelling, and it's a good idea, and it's got research basis behind it, and it'll work, but they'll just stick with that one idea for years. And whatever it is, And it might be strategy, it might be ownership, it might be vision, it might be accountability, it might be any of these different topics, and they don't realize that you need a variety of topics. And the reality is most people can only focus on something for so long before you start getting diminishing returns from that focus. And so being able to shift actually helps you cumulatively over time grow faster. So that's the basic concept behind it. But towards the end of the book, I talk about recovery. And I think that in my experience working with just average people who want to be fit, this is less of an issue because usually the bigger challenge for them is to be regular and consistent. But when you're working with driven athletes, whether they're competitive or it's just on a personal level, for those people, just that type of personality, the challenge is to get them to stop. And they absolutely, even if they cognitively know it, they don't believe that resting is any good.
Right.
And they'll keep pushing through. And the story we were telling beforehand is this is while I was a trainer, I knew better, but I was in my mid 40s and I was like, man, if I don't start doing the things now, it's not going to happen. And I was like, I've never done a 500-pound deadlift. I'm going to learn that. I'm going to learn to do strongman events because I wanted to compete in an event. So I'm going to do a bunch of heavy lifting beyond the deadlift. And I wanted to do gymnastics. I'd always wanted to since I was in high school, never did it. So I'm going to teach myself how to do the rings.
Wow.
Which none of this stuff is small on its own.
I know, right?
So I was training hard for all of it at the same time and getting gains. But without resting, at a certain point, I couldn't brush my teeth anymore because my hands hurt so bad, my knees, everything hurt. And it wasn't a sustainable approach. And I think that's where leaders can deceive ourselves is high performers can juggle 15, 20, 100 balls at once for a little bit of time.
For a while,
Then eventually, and so we think we can do it, but eventually we can't. Something happens and it's too much for us. And we start to break down or things break down around us. And so I think understanding that incorporating rest periods into your training is healthy. And in fact, the best research around physical performance will show that how you incorporate your rests, even in individual workouts, has a strong correlation to how effective your workout will be. And really the reality is most workouts, if you're really building strength or skill, shouldn't leave you completely gassed out. That's very popular right now to have a training where you're completely gassed out and there's a puke bucket corner. But you don't actually get the greatest gains from that.
Interesting.
And it's hard. It's hard for athletes to shift, and it's hard for leaders to shift. It's true in leadership as well, that if you're pushing yourself and your teams redlining constantly, something will break. And you're moving at a pace that sometimes it's hard to fix and stop it. And you're getting gains probably, but you're probably not getting the gains you could if you went to a different pacing.
Yeah, it seems to me too that, as I think about leadership and the growth in leadership and like a high performing team, if you're not resting and if you're pushing your team too far, you might get these little marginal gains, but what could you have get if you actually kind of came off the gas pedal for just a little while and let people rest, recuperate, and get refreshed. And I found that part was really fascinating to me, because I think there's this myth, like there is in training, but in leadership, that we have to keep the pedal to the metal the whole time. At least in the era that I grew up in, that was kind of the mentality that I grew up with. In business, it's fill your calendar from morning till night, and you'll rest when you're dead. And gosh, it's just exhausting.
It is exhausting, and I mean, it's. I think it was more prominent, like a little bit older generations. There's been some shift, but it's also very prominent in certain industries. So the tech industry is a grinding type industry. A lot of my clients are in construction or in the medical space. They're both grinding type industries. Any professional space that's really into hourly billing can be very grinding oriented. So there's a lot of industries, especially ones that attract high performers, that just have a natural tendency in that direction. And The research shows that you do get diminishing returns if you're doing 60-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks.
Yeah, right.
Almost without exception, leaders in those spaces will say it's not true. It's not possible to do this kind of work without it. But I find with my clients that I can take let's say a $20 million company and help them grow in 2 years to a $50 or $60 million company. And the entire leadership team will have more time at their disposal to go home. They're going home earlier. They're spending more time with their families. They're more at peace themselves. They're sleeping at night.
Yeah.
And they're able to do growth. And so I just don't, there's periods where you have to push hard, and there's periods where that's good.
Right.
But those should be short.
Yeah.
And then you go back to a more sustainable pacing. And if you don't, you do tend to, I won't say it can't work, but I don't think you're getting as much out of it as you think you are, and you're setting the stage for significant problems.
Yeah, and I would think you're setting the stage for burning out your team too.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah.
They're gonna break at some point.
They are, and this is something I think for senior leaders now who grew up in that grinding cult, whether it's the culture or the generations or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something to be aware of, is that demographically there's such a huge shift in just basically availability of employees. Like it's just the numbers of people aren't there anymore, and for our lifetimes aren't likely to be. And so to create a workplace that is both highly productive but also feels more sustainable or healthier to the employees, I think is really becoming a competitive advantage, because employees now know if they're halfway decent, they know they've got some, they know they have, they know that they're the seller in the situation and it's their market.
Yeah,
and I think you have to create a space that doesn't coddle them, but recognizes, if it's true for us to get equal to or better performance with less effort, maybe we should figure that out.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt. Well, where should leaders start then? If you start thinking about how do we periodize our leadership, where do they start? And when I think about the periodization, I tended to want to get an aerobic base. I wanted to have some kind of a base building period.
Yeah.
And how do you equate that then to leadership?
Yeah. So, well, I think a good place to start would be reading my book.
Right. So absolutely, I agree.
So you can kind of see how it fits together, and and there's suggested even training plans in there for working through that. I find that in executive coaching, that the biggest challenge that almost all of my clients have is more in the area of self-management. So at the very, very beginning, very earlier practices where they don't manage their priorities well, they don't manage their calendar well, they don't manage their energy well. And because of that, everything else is more difficult to accomplish or do. And when they start managing themselves well, then it just naturally flows that it becomes easier for them to manage their organizations effectively as well. Yeah. And so I would say there's that beginning basis there of spending time on, those self-management concepts that I just, some of which I just mentioned. So that's where I would begin with that for most people.
It's
even very experienced leaders. Even very experienced leaders, I find that someone's been in executive leadership for 15 years, 20 years. I find that the challenges that they're bumping up against now, whatever the reason was as they called me, is almost never because they don't know how to do something.
Right.
It has to do with a self-management habit that they never put into place. And so part of my background, the sport that I practice, after this podcast, actually, I'm going to run off to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's what I do now. As an old guy, my sports get riskier. So
that's great.
I wouldn't say wisdom is leading my way, but it's fun. I think oftentimes in Jiu-Jitsu, if you're strong, it's easy to try to use strength instead of technique, and to believe you're good because you can outpower somebody. And the real challenge is to learn how do you dial back and really practice technique. And that's really the same application is in leadership. There's techniques beginning with self-management and then moving on that actually allow you to accomplish dramatically more with a lot less effort.
Yeah.
If you're willing to do that. But most leaders are very used to powering through things and just making things happen.
Yeah.
There's a place to use that. But if that's all that you've got, then you're stuck when you meet a challenge that feels bigger than you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it was interesting when I was reading through, I forget which chapter it was, but you talked about some things that I think are fundamental to every executive leader, and that is, calendar blocking, and then you talked about energy blocking, which I thought is fascinating, and then attention blocking, and the idea of focusing our attention, especially in the era that we live in. I've found that the leaders that I've coached, that's it's kind of a predominant challenge is managing the focus, and I just wondered, like, how do you help leaders to be able to do that? I know there was one thing in your book that I thought was really pretty clever, and I'll tell you what that is here in a second.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious what you can say. I mean, the way that I recommend approaching these things is you take the best time of your day where you're most productive, and you just dedicate that to doing the most important work. I just had a coaching meeting with a client yesterday, and I said, just take a block of time, an hour. It's usually people can sustain that kind of attention for about 60 to 90 minutes is typically the max. I said, find that time in your day, dedicate it to this, whatever your important thing is. Then if the rest of your day is just getting swept away in the rapids of your workplace, like, okay, that's fine, but you got your one important thing done. And that's what I recommend. There's some interesting research around, I believe it's called ultradian rhythms, where your body has these cycles of being able to concentrate and focus and be at more productive energy. And during a normal work day, most people will only have one or possibly two of these cycles. You'll have one, maybe a larger one, and then a smaller one as your energy diminishes during the day. And so recognizing when those times are, and then making sure you preserve it. So that's the first thing I would recommend is understand your own sort of rhythm. For most people, it's in the morning. So for you, or, talking to the listener, if you come in and right now, the first thing you tend to do in the morning is you go get coffee, you go get, a snack, you go sit down and get caught up on emails. You may have blown through your most productive space by answering emails, which didn't really require the best that you had to offer. And instead, if you come in and it's like, okay, from 8:30 to 9:30, I'm only going to focus on this most important task that really requires my creative energy. And then after that, maybe emails or whatever. That tends, and it's one of those things where it feels like it's not really that much, an hour a day, maybe focused on this important thing. But cumulatively, if you can get 5 really effective hours focused on something, the research shows, and I think all of my clients that follow this, their experience shows, they can accomplish far more in that 1 hour period than they could in 3 or 4 hours of being distracted, dealing with notifications, people coming through your door, everything else.
Well, and I know that most executives are going to have someone who helps them to manage the calendar too. And if that person helps them to really protect that time, then it's up to the executive, the leader, to to actually focus on that time block and do what they need to do during that time block. But one of the things that you said in the book that I thought was really powerful. It's a tool that is called brain.fm, and I've used that myself when I'm writing. And I think that if you're a leader and you need something to help you to really kind of focus in, that brain music is, I think it's transformational, because it's one of those things that it just tunes your brain to be able to focus on whatever task you're working on. And it's so helpful. And I loved that you mentioned that, because I
Yeah.
think it's a tool that's really powerful.
Yeah, there's a couple of brain.fm, and I don't have any affiliation with them other than I'm a subscriber. But
Yeah, right.
there's a few tools like that, and there's another
Hmm.
set of tools called binaural beats
Oh, yes. Yeah.
that or rhythms that people listen to, and they're kind of white noisy sounding or have different sounds.
Yeah.
But the idea is they help your brain settle and
Hmm.
focus
Mm.
and prepare you for the work that you're trying to do. And I find that with all of the distractions that are around, for many people, it's helpful to put on noise canceling headphones or
Yeah.
have, a speaker in their room. Basically, any help you can get to help you be successful, we
Yeah.
need, because I think we've become so, right. I'm from the MTV generation. You're
Mm.
so used to like thinking of things in 10-minute slices, 10-second slices, these
Yeah.
little like quick jumps
Yeah.
that, and it's only exaggerated now with social media. I think people have a hard time just sitting and focusing on something
Yeah.
for more than a few minutes without feeling like I need a new dopamine hit from somewhere. So this
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It really does. Well, and I think that having that tool to be able to focus helps every leader to really manage their priorities and manage
Yeah.
the focus on the priorities. And you talk about that too in the book of managing your priorities,
Yeah.
follow through, and then focus and intensity, and then practice patience. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about practicing patience. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges for leaders is, especially entrepreneurial leaders,
Yeah.
is not giving things enough time to bear fruit.
Mm.
And so, we're recording this now and it's springtime. And so people are starting to think about gardening or
Yeah.
whatever. And there's certain things that you just plant and you just have to trust it's doing something there under the ground.
So true.
And it can be, if you want to keep digging and looking at it and fussing with it and trying to make it do something faster, you'll wreck it probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think oftentimes there are leaders will come to me and they'll say, hey, I'm trying to work on the culture in my organization,
Yeah.
or we're trying to improve performance in this area, or whatever the thing is. And some of them want an answer that they can walk away with by the end of the week or
Yeah.
today. And it's like, well, we can do this, but for that kind of challenge, there's a certain amount of, it's just some of these things take time
Yeah. Right.
because
Right.
you can't force certain lessons. Cognitively, you might get it, but for it to really become a habit,
A habit.
it's just going
Yeah.
to take time. And
Yeah.
so when I do executive coaching, I usually tell people my experience is it takes 2 or 3 months for a typical client just to settle
Right.
and actually start engaging with things.
Mm-hmm.
We start to see progress within about 6 months. That's when the little seedlings start to pop up.
Yeah.
But it often takes at least another 6 months for things to become habituated.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that way, but
Right.
that's a very normal, very human
Mm-hmm.
growth trajectory. And if somebody's like, hey, I want to hire you, we're going to have an intense, weekend together, and we're just going to like, I'm going to be a different person at the end of it. It's like, maybe,
Yeah.
but probably not,
It might only last for just a little while though, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really become part of who you are. And that's
Yeah.
what people are trying to create. That deep level change just
Mm-hmm.
requires time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, is just for people to have patience with themselves, patience with their teams,
Mm-hmm.
patience with processes, and either not abandon
Yeah.
or not try to force things to happen faster than having a realistic sense of how long some things might take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I gotta believe that that's really hard in the corporate environment, because many stakeholders want things to happen like instantaneously,
Right.
you
Right.
know. And
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge that a lot of leaders have, is to balance that tension, the tension of
Yeah.
results versus that gestational period that you talked about,
Right.
just that time that it takes just to get the roots laid
Yeah.
down. So
Yeah, and it is hard, and that's where building the strength. One of the strengths is the ability to cast vision or to be able to gather vision or
Mm-hmm.
communicate vision. And then one of the long enduring traits is the ability to refresh vision.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into patience, because being able to find kind of waypoints, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're not there yet, but this shows progress.
Yeah.
Being
Right.
able to identify that for yourself and for your team can
Mm-hmm.
help people realize, okay, there is motion here, there is something
Yeah.
happening.
Right.
And then having this practice of being able to go back and still be excited about where we're going
Mm-hmm.
when there's a waiting period. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the same thing. An easy kind of an example of this is if somebody's trying to save up money to make a big purchase. They want to buy
Right.
a car, they want to buy a house, and you just want to get all the money in there right now and make the thing. But it's
Yeah.
like, to do these monthly little deposits, each one feels insignificant on its own,
Yeah.
and to wait for it to build up can be really hard. But the people that learn to do that actually end up having enormous financial power, because they can
Right.
make certain things happen
Yeah.
because they've learned that discipline of patience.
And that, yeah, the patience and the power, they understand that power of compounding. And it's like anything, I think it was in your book, or it may have been in a prior conversation that you and I had, but it was talking about, or you were talking about how, even in sports, we don't go and, well, I'll speak from experience. Like, so I used to do triathlon, and so I didn't go and immediately go out and run a half Ironman distance triathlon. Just,
Right,
I mean, I probably could have. I wouldn't have walked the next day, but
right, right.
it wouldn't have been wise either. I would have hurt
Yeah,
myself, and
yeah,
so it takes time to be able to build, and to build the strength, to build the endurance, to build
yeah,
the power then, and all of those things. And I think in leadership we have to think about the same thing, and we have to be able to be patient, to allow the
yeah.
things to breathe, and allow the habits to begin to take over. And that sometimes is hard to do, though.
It is hard to do, but it is one of those traits that I would say high performing leaders, high performing organizations that are sustaining that performance over time,
Mm-hmm.
they learn this relationship between an appropriate level of patience and knowing when to push and be
Yeah.
assertive and to drive,
Mm-hmm.
and getting that balance between the two. So an example of this is, I just had shoulder surgery on my arm a few months ago.
Okay.
And so as I'm rebuilding, both with strength training and jujitsu and so on, there's this drive part where I have to push myself in physical therapy,
Mm.
or lifting things that feel uncomfortable or any of that. But I also have to be able to pull back and allow the process to have sufficient amount of time so I
Yeah.
don't re-injure my arm.
Sure.
And ultimately, if I remember, okay, in a year from now, I'll be back to where I was, probably, possibly even stronger, because I'm being more methodical
Mm-hmm.
about this than what I was doing before. I may end up being even in a better position, but
Mm.
only if I give it time. If I try to rush this,
Yeah.
I'm going to actually not get anything more out of it, and I'm very likely to injure myself,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a way that'll prolong the whole process. And so uh, I don't find there's a place for speed, but there's a place for waiting as well. And being able to manage those two things, I think, is what allows leaders to, yeah, keep going for a very long time without damaging things or burning themselves out, or
Yeah.
creating problems.
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think that the damage can be damaging themselves, their physical health,
Yeah,
could be damaging their relationships, could
for
be
sure.
damaging the team, could be
Yeah,
damaging the company, quite frankly,
yeah,
because if they're pushing all the time,
yeah.
some, like you said, something's going to break.
Well, and a lot of the pushes are perceived. So we think our stakeholders want this, and sometimes people do,
Yeah.
but I would say most of the executives I work with and most of the owners that I work with, there's this other um figure out there that's kind of commanding their pace, that isn't actually anyone immediately around them. So there's a competitor out there that they're trying to keep up with.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
former business partner that they had a
Sure.
bad relationship with, and now they're going to prove something to that person. They're
Yeah.
proving something to a parent based off of something that was said decades
So,
ago.
yeah.
Those are the things that I find that tend to be the bigger drivers of pacing
Mm-hmm.
than actually the demands of the moment. And many leaders don't make that differentiation, and they're frustrated because they're
Yeah.
not moving fast enough. They're not big enough. I mean, I've been vulnerable to this as well. And there's this sense of I need to accomplish this faster, bigger, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But where's that coming from?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it isn't anyone else's real actual expectation. It's all
Mm-hmm.
internally driven based off of our own perceived sense of how fast we need to be going. And
Yeah.
um, that well, it's an exhausting way to live.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad you brought that up because there are so many other factors that drive us, and it's not necessarily ones that are have a direct impact on our business. It's internal,
Yeah,
internal drivers and
yeah.
perceived drivers. So
And I think particularly once a business or a leader becomes successful, right? So
yeah.
there's all this work to make things go, and
Mm-hmm.
you develop a sense of effort and pacing to actually get past the survival stage and get to a place of actual success.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge is learning how to adjust your pacing so that you're not coasting and letting things fall apart,
Right.
but understanding that the pacing that is valuable in a state of success is a little bit different than the one that is required to survive. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when you really need all hands on deck, we need to make it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that uh, many leaders don't understand that well or don't think about that well, is that different seasons of your leadership and your organization require different levels of pacing.
Yeah.
And
So
if you
good.
don't adjust, you end up either not pushing hard enough when you should, or not pushing, or not taking a break or backing off when you also should.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that you brought that into the conversation today because that seasonality I think is really important. I know that you've seen this before, but every growth spurt that a company goes through is I call it like a season. It's like growth season.
Yeah.
And if you don't take a little bit of time to assess before you keep going on to the next growth phase, you may not learn the lessons that you need to learn from the
Yeah.
previous growth,
Yeah.
or you may not. I mean, it could implode if you don't do things right for the next season.
Right.
But I love the seasonality approach.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, when it comes to growth, a lot of my clients are scaling. So they're making large jumps. And,
Yeah.
the typical executive will sit down with me and say, here's my growth plan. And they'll have the classic hockey stick, graph where we're
Yeah.
going to grow 5%, 10% a year, over this period of time. And nobody experiences growth like that. It
Yeah.
just doesn't happen. It comes in, I usually redraw it as a set of stairs.
Stairs. Yeah. I was thinking the same
And
thing. Yeah.
most of my clients are stuck at what they feel like is a wall, but it's really the
Mm,
bottom of a step.
yeah.
And they need to change something. And some of what happens there is these seasonalities. So if you're at the bottom of a step, there's probably going to need to be some kind of a shift, which will feel like a lot of effort for a little
Mm,
while,
yeah.
that will get you up to this next level. It's going to be effort doing something different because you probably already did everything that you already knew how to do, and it got you where you're at. So something has to change.
Yeah.
But then once you get to the next step, yeah, I think it's important to learn those lessons, to absorb the value of the next step,
Yeah.
to position yourself. It's not impossible for clients to jump more than one step quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but if they're not led by someone who understands what needs to be put into place, you
Mm,
end up building a very rickety structure
sure.
that they often do implode on themselves. They
Mm-hmm.
collapse. Either when that key leader leaves or when something happens in the organization and it just didn't have the internal strength.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. One of the things that I really liked about your book, and I don't even think I said the title yet, but "Train to Lead." I can see the picture of it right over your left shoulder,
Yeah.
which is great. But I love the title too. But one of the things that I liked that you did in the book is you create kind of at the end of each chapter, you were creating really some self-assessment and some questions that people could and leaders could reflect on. And I'm kind of curious, what led you to do that? Because I think that's a really great way to incorporate everything that you've shared in the chapter that it was
Yeah.
following.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I based part of how I structured the book around what I thought were some of the better fitness books that I've read. And so I was like, well, how do they structure it? How do they teach different exercises or movements?
Yeah.
And often they'll teach you, here's the concept behind it, and here's how to do whatever the lift is or whatever the movement is. And then there's a training program.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the book as well, as I'm introducing concept, very practical application. I designed most of these to dovetail into a normal leader's day, so it doesn't really take up much time.
Right.
But it fits into what they're already doing. And yeah, so and then based off of levels of experience, I provided a way where people can self-coach themselves through the content in the book with already provided exercises, so that they're able to really kind of grow on their own. And so I think it's always better to work with a coach, just the same thing with athletics, but you can get a lot out of self-coaching if you have good guidance and you're patient and you work the process and those things.
Well, and you're right. I mean, it is a coach is going to see something that you're not going to see in yourself. We all have blind spots. And so you're probably going to pick up something that, I don't see. If I'm practicing those exercises, I may be practicing something wrong and I don't even notice it, but you can see it. And so having an external coach is so valuable.
It's hugely valuable. I mean, going through my physical therapy, I was doing some very light bench press stuff, and I've done bench press for 35, 40 years.
Sure.
And it was interesting that my physical therapist was pointing out something about my technique that I had never heard of or thought of before.
Really?
That was a real minor adjustment that actually made a significant difference in terms of the comfort of the movement and really probably the biomechanical safety of the movement. And I wasn't inexperienced, something I knew.
Sure.
I thought I knew a lot about. Oh, I did. But yeah, having somebody external. There's a benefit to that, but you don't always have it, or you don't always have access to it, or whatever. And so I think I just wanted to create something that was very accessible to people, that was very consumable to people. The concept I was using in this, there's a concept in nutrition called bioavailability. So there's certain supplements you take and they just pass straight through your system.
Right.
There's other ones you take and your body can absorb them and use them.
Yeah.
And so understanding that there's a difference between that, I wanted to make the content in this book very bioavailable. So not you just read it, you're excited about it, and then you forgot about it next week and you're on to a new book, which, it's fine if people do that. But what I wanted to do is to create a way of, metabolizing the content or the concept so that actually people can integrate it easily, as easily as possible into their lives. That was really the hope that I had in how I wrote that.
Well, I think you did a fantastic job. I really liked that approach, and I highly recommend it to our listeners. If you're listening, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see a picture of it. We're going to put a link to Christian's website and his information there, so that you can go get the book. I'm assuming the website is the best place to get the book, or
probably for most people, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or anywhere online is probably the easiest place.
Got it. And how do people get in touch with you, Christian? What if somebody just says, "Hey, I'd love to learn more about what you do"? Where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Yeah, the easiest place. I mean, they can follow me on LinkedIn. I write regular content, but I also put out regular weekly emails. So if they reach out to me on my website, christianmuntean.com. They can find a way to subscribe there or reach out to me directly if they can't find it.
Yeah, absolutely.
you can access that or set up a meeting with me.
Well, and I will tell you, you write regularly on LinkedIn. I know I followed you, and you got some great, really great blogs and really great content. So, for those of you who are watching or just listening, go follow Christian on LinkedIn. Check out his blogs, good stuff. And I know you've got a podcast as well. What's your podcast's name again?
I had one. Yeah,
oh,
it was
had
called
one. Okay.
it was called The Leadership Coach.
Gotcha.
Podcasts are a lot of work. Book
they
writing's
are.
a lot. Authoring's a lot of work.
They are.
Podcasts are a lot of work, and so I tried podcasting for a while, and then I realized this is probably not my work. So, at least not right now.
Trust me, I understand. Well, Christian, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your work, man. Anybody who is helping leaders to learn, to grow, to get better, man, is a friend of mine. And I just really appreciate, what you're doing.
Well, thank you, David. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.